"Don't sign it," the black waitress whispered. The billionaire lost $200 million instantly. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Richardson Industries as 42-year-old billionaire James Richardson adjusted his silk tie one final time. In just 30 minutes, he would sign the most important deal of his career, a merger worth $400 million that would cement his empire's dominance. His hands, usually steady as steel, trembled slightly as he picked up the Mont Blanc pen his father had given him decades ago. What James didn't know was that across town, 34-year-old Kia Washington was clocking in for another double shift at Murphy's Diner, carrying a secret that would change both their lives forever. She had no idea that their paths would cross in less than 2 hours, or that 3 simple words she'd whisper would cost him $200 million, and save him from losing everything that truly mattered. Sometimes the most powerful people need saving by those who seem to have the least power of all. Where are you watching from tonight? James Richardson had built his fortune on precision and trust. Every contract, every handshake, every signature had been calculated to perfection. His corner office on the 42nd floor overlooked the city he'd conquered one deal at a time, but today felt different. The merger documents sat heavy in his leather briefcase as his driver navigated the morning traffic toward the neutral meeting ground, Murphy's Diner, chosen specifically because it was unremarkable, private, and forgotten by the world that mattered to men like him. Kia had worked at Murphy's for 3 years, ever since her husband Marcus lost his job at the factory. She knew every regular customer's order by heart, remembered their kids' names, and always had a warm smile despite the ache in her feet from standing 14 hours a day. Her section included Booth 7, the corner table that businessmen sometimes chose when they wanted to conduct meetings away from prying eyes. She'd served countless deals over coffee and pie, always invisible, always listening, always forgotten the moment they left. That morning, Kia noticed something unusual. Her regular customer, elderly Mr. Patterson, hadn't touched his usual breakfast. Instead, he sat hunched over a newspaper, his weathered hands shaking as he read the business section. She'd known him for 2 years. He came in every Tuesday and Friday, always ordered scrambled eggs and wheat toast, always left a $5 tip even though his clothes were threadbare and his wallet was thin. "Mr. Patterson? Everything all right?" she asked gently, refilling his coffee cup. He looked up with tears in his eyes. "My grandson worked for Richardson Industries for 15 years. Good boy. Honest worker. They laid off 300 people last month to make the books look better for some big merger." His voice cracked. "He's got 2 little ones at home, and his wife's expecting again." Kia's heart clenched. She'd heard similar stories too many times, hard-working families destroyed by decisions made in boardrooms they'd never see. She squeezed Mr. Patterson's shoulder gently. "I'm so sorry. That boy of yours raised a fine man, and good people always find their way." 20 minutes later, she watched a black town car pull up outside. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, briefcase in hand, scanning the diner with the calculating eyes of someone who viewed everything as either useful or disposable. James Richardson had arrived early for his merger meeting, wanting to secure the perfect table for the final negotiations. He chose Booth 7. As Kia approached with a menu and a water glass, she recognized him immediately from the newspaper photo lying open beside Mr. Patterson's untouched eggs. The man responsible for hundreds of families' heartbreak was sitting in her section, about to make another fortune while good people like Mr. Patterson's grandson struggled to feed their children. James barely glanced at her as she set down the water. To him, she was furniture, necessary but invisible. He had no idea that the woman pouring his coffee had just connected his face to Mr. Patterson's tears, or that in the next hour, her conscience would collide with his ambition in a way that would change everything. Within minutes of James settling into Booth 7, 2 other men in expensive suits joined him. Kia recognized the type immediately, the kind of men who spoke in numbers that represented more money than her entire neighborhood would see in a lifetime. She moved efficiently around nearby tables, close enough to overhear fragments of their conversation while appearing completely absorbed in her work. "The environmental reports are buried deep in the appendix," the older man was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "Page 412. Nobody reads that far." James nodded, scanning the thick document. And the contamination levels? Manageable, the third man replied with a cold smile. By the time anyone notices, the merger will be complete. We'll be long gone, and the cleanup will be someone else's problem. Kia's blood ran cold as she wiped down the neighboring table. They were talking about poisoning land, about hiding environmental damage from whoever they were selling to. She thought about her own neighborhood, where 3 families had lost everything when the old textile plant had leaked chemicals into their water supply 5 years ago. The lawyers had tied up the case for years while children got sick and medical bills piled up. The indigenous community lease expires in 6 months, James continued, his voice matter of fact. Once this merger goes through, we can revoke it early. That's another $50 million in timber rights. What about the families living there? The older man asked. James shrugged. Relocation assistance. Standard package. They'll survive. Kia's hands trembled as she reached for another table's dirty plates. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, these were people's homes, their ancestral lands, their children's futures. She'd grown up hearing her grandmother's stories about being forced from their family farm when developers decided the land was worth more than the lives built on it. As she walked past booth 7 again, James was reviewing the signature pages. His pen hovered over the first document, and she could see the pride in his eyes as he prepared to add another victory to his collection. That's when she noticed something that made her heart pound, the letterhead on the documents. Clearwater Mining Corporation. She knew that name. Her cousin lived 3 towns over, near one of their old sites. The groundwater had been poisoned for 15 years. Children born there had higher rates of illness than anywhere else in the state, and the company had spent more money on lawyers than on cleanup. If this man signed those papers, another community would suffer the same fate. Another group of families would watch their children get sick, while wealthy men counted their profits from a safe distance. Kia thought about Mr. Patterson's grandson, about her own children who deserved clean water and safe air, about the grandmother who'd taught her that sometimes good people have to stand up even when they're scared. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. As James lifted his pen to begin signing, Kia made a choice that would haunt and define the rest of her life. She couldn't let this happen. Not while she had the power to stop it. Not while she was the only person in the room who understood what those signatures really meant. But how could a waitress earning minimum wage stop a billionaire from destroying countless lives? Kia's mind raced as she watched James's pen touch the first page. In that split second, she saw her grandmother's face, the woman who'd cleaned houses for wealthy families her entire life, who'd taught Kia that character wasn't measured by what you owned, but by what you did when you thought nobody was watching. "More coffee, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice steadier than her hands as she approached booth 7. James waved her away dismissively, but the older man nodded. As she poured, her eyes caught specific details in the open documents. Clearwater's hidden environmental studies, maps showing contaminated groundwater spreading toward a small town called Millfield, and most chilling of all, internal memos discussing acceptable casualty rates for the local population. Millfield. Her heart nearly stopped. That's where her sister lived with her 3 young children. The magnitude of what was happening crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't just about Mr. Patterson's grandson or some distant community she'd never seen. Her own family, her sister Janet, her nephews, her baby niece who just turned 2, they were all living directly in the path of Clearwater's planned expansion. James had resumed signing, his movements confident and practiced. Each signature brought him closer to $200 million and brought her family closer to drinking poisoned water for the next generation. "Sir," she heard herself saying before she could stop the words. All 3 men looked up, annoyed at the interruption. James's eyes were cold, impatient. What? Kia's throat felt dry as desert sand. These men could destroy her life with a phone call. They could have her fired, blacklisted, or even arrested if they claimed she was threatening them. But she thought about little Emma, her sister's baby, taking her first steps in a backyard that would soon be contaminated. "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I couldn't help overhearing. My sister lives in Millfield." The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. The older man's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Young lady, you need to mind your own business and get back to work." But James held up a hand, studying Kia with new interest. For the first time since entering the diner, he really looked at her, saw the intelligence in her eyes, the careful way she chose her words, the quiet strength that reminded him suddenly of his own mother. "What about Millfield?" he asked. Kia's heart pounded so hard she was sure they could hear it. "The groundwater table flows directly under the elementary school. My nephew Tommy goes there. He's 7. Her voice cracked slightly. "If there's contamination." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. For just a moment, something flickered across James's face, a shadow of doubt, a memory of conscience he'd buried under years of profitable deals. Have you ever faced something like this? A moment when speaking up could cost you everything, but staying silent would cost you your soul? Let us know in the comments. The older man leaned forward aggressively. "This conversation is over. Security." But James was staring at the documents with new eyes, and Kia realized she had maybe 10 seconds before her chance was gone forever. "Don't sign it," Kia whispered, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. The 3 words hung in the air between them, simple yet devastating. James's pen froze halfway to the signature line as every eye in the booth fixed on her. The older man's face flushed red with fury, but Kia kept her gaze locked on James, seeing something in his expression that gave her the courage to continue. "Please," she said quietly. "Just don't sign it." "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" the older man hissed. "This deal is worth $400 million. "I know exactly what I'm doing," Kia replied, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I'm trying to save my family." James set down his pen, leaning back in the booth. "Tell me about Millfield." "There's nothing to tell," the third man interrupted sharply. "The environmental assessments were thorough. Everything's within acceptable parameters." But Kia saw the doubt growing in James's eyes. "My sister moved there because it was safe and affordable. Good schools, clean air, families who looked out for each other. Tommy plays Little League on the field behind Miller's Creek." She paused, meeting James's gaze directly. "That's the same creek mentioned on page 412 of your documents. The one that'll be contaminated within 18 months. James's hand moved toward the document stack, then stopped. "How do you know about page 412? "Because I was listening. Because I had to." Kia's voice grew stronger. "My grandmother cleaned houses for men like you her whole life. She taught me that sometimes the only difference between good and evil is whether someone with power chooses to use it or abuse it." The older man stood abruptly. "James, we don't have time for this nonsense. Sign the papers." But James was remembering something, a conversation with his father years ago, when the old man was dying. "Son," his father had whispered, "money multiplies, but conscience divides. Every choice cuts away a piece of who you are. Make sure there's something left worth keeping." "What would happen if I didn't sign?" James asked quietly. "You'd lose $200 million, the older man snapped. "And Clearwater would find another buyer within a month. Someone with fewer scruples." James looked at Kia, really looked at her. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes from working double shifts, the worry lines that came from counting every dollar, the quiet dignity of someone who'd chosen to risk everything for strangers she'd never meet. She reminded him of someone, his mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through school, who'd taught him that wealth without character was just expensive emptiness. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kia Washington." "Kia," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "That's a beautiful name." For the first time in hours, she smiled. "It means morning flower in my grandmother's language." James nodded slowly, then did something that shocked everyone in the booth, including himself. He closed the document folder and slid it across the table, away from his pen. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. "Gentlemen," he said firmly. "The deal is off." But as the older man's face twisted with rage and threats began flying across the table, Kia realized that her victory might have just put both of their lives in danger. The older man's threats filled the diner's air like poison, but James Richardson sat calmly in booth 7, his decision made and his conscience finally clear. "You can't just walk away from this," the man snarled. "We have contracts, commitments. People are expecting me to make money," James interrupted quietly. "But they're not expecting me to sleep at night afterward." He looked at Kia, who stood frozen beside their table, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. Sometimes the most expensive thing you can buy is peace of mind. The two men stormed out of Murphy's diner, their expensive suits and bitter threats disappearing into the morning traffic. James sat alone with the unsigned documents, feeling lighter than he had in years. The $200 million loss would hurt his company, but it wouldn't destroy it. What would have destroyed him was signing his name to something that would poison children for generations. "Why did you do that?" Kia asked softly, sliding into the seat across from him. James smiled, not the calculated smile he used in boardrooms, but the genuine expression he hadn't worn since childhood. "Because a wise woman once told me that conscience divides every choice. I decided I wanted to keep the better half." "Your grandmother sounds like she was special." "My mother," he corrected gently. "And yes, she was. She would have liked you." Over the next hour, as the diner's morning rush swirled around them, James learned about Kia's life, her husband's job loss, her children's dreams, her sister in Millfield. In return, he shared stories his therapist had never heard, about the loneliness of wealth, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives, and the fear that he'd become someone his parents wouldn't recognize. When it was time to leave, James left a tip that would cover Kia's rent for 3 months. But more importantly, he left his business card with a note written on the back: environmental consultant position. Starting salary, $85,000. Your first project, auditing all Richardson Industries environmental practices. Jr. "I don't have a college degree," Kia protested. "You have something better," James replied. "You have integrity." 6 months later, Richardson Industries became the first major corporation to voluntarily exceed federal environmental standards. James had discovered that doing the right thing, while initially expensive, attracted investors and customers who valued long-term thinking over short-term profits. The company's stock price, after an initial dip, had recovered stronger than ever. Kia Washington, now Environmental Ethics Director, had testified before Congress about the importance of community voices in corporate decision-making. Her nephew Tommy still played Little League behind Miller's Creek, in water that ran cleaner than it had in decades. And sometimes, on quiet Tuesday mornings, James Richardson could still be found in booth 7 at Murphy's Diner, sharing coffee and conversation with the woman who'd saved his soul with 3 simple words. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. Thank you for joining us today. May you always have the strength to speak up when your conscience calls.